Hey guys, back again with another video, another review, this time on Danganronpa V3. And this is going to be a spoiler-free review. It's going to be a bit of a short one. I was thinking about doing like a spoiler review just because it's very hard to talk about these games without going into spoilers because they're very story-driven games and they've have like a lot of like crazy plot twists. And I think a lot of the discussion would come from like a spoiler review, and I might do that at a later date. But I did want to just put out like a quick review for this game because I just finished it a couple days ago. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know I'm a pretty big fan of this series. The first two games on the Vita, and then they eventually came to PS4. But I really love those games. They're some of my favorite visual novels. I didn't think they quite hit the heights of 999 and Virtue's Last Reward. I think those games were a little more my style. They were a lot darker. Like the atmosphere was a lot more like foreboding and just like creepy. And I don't know. I thought the stories in those games were just more my style. The Danganronpa games are very Japanese. They're very strange and out there. They're very compelling, and there's like a good sense of mystery to them, and they can be quite dark at times. But there's also a lot of humor to these games, and it's the same with Danganronpa V3. I laughed out loud a lot of times during this game because some of the character interactions and dialogue are just absolutely hilarious. And the series always has tons of references to like real life TV shows and movies and anime and things like that. So yeah, it's really like the style of the game. Like it's super Japanese, and normally I'm not into that kind of thing. But I do really like the Danganronpa games. The first two games made my Game of the Year list back when they came out because I think both of them came out in the same year originally on the Vita. Now since those two, we actually had an anime that came out. Which is essentially the third game. It's not a video game, but the third game, like the follow-up to Danganronpa 2, was actually the anime. And I haven't watched the anime. I've heard mixed things on it. Some people like it, but for the most part, I heard it was pretty mediocre. And it's just, I don't know, it just didn't really interest me. I just never had the interest in seeing it, even though I've heard a lot of people say that you should watch it before playing this game. But I just didn't have the time for it. I have such limited time these days, and I'd rather use that time to play another game or watch some movie that I've been really excited for. So I never got around to watching the anime, but I don't feel like I missed out on a whole lot now after playing this game. And then there was also the spin-off, Ultra Despair Girls, I think it was called. It wasn't really in the visual novel format of the first two games. It was like this weird third-person shooter with like a bunch of gimmicky mini-games. It looked horrible. Everyone I know that's played it didn't think it was all that good. And I watched like a Let's Play of it. I remember being like, oh my god, this looks terrible. Because like the gameplay is horrendous in that game from the looks of it. And then the storyline in it and the writing was just like a massive step backward compared to Danganronpa 1 and 2. But that one, you really don't need to have played that one to play V3. And I've heard a lot of people saying that you don't really need to play the first two games before playing this one. And in a way, it's... Man, I gotta be really careful about what I say here. But all I will say is that if you're planning on playing this game and you haven't played the first two, definitely play the first two games first. I know before playing the game, I had heard a lot of people say, oh, you don't really need to. But honestly, you'll get a lot more out of this game if you've played the first two. And that's all I'll say. I can't say any more than that because I'll end up spoiling some things. But yeah, Danganronpa V3. It's come quite a long time after the second game. It feels like it's been forever since that second game. And yeah, this is a terrific wrap up to the I guess the Danganronpa series basically. Because it does have a very satisfying conclusion. This game. And it really started to make me think of the Zero Time Escape games, or the Zero Escape trilogy, I should say. Whereas Zero Time Dilemma, the third game, was such a disappointment for me, and I've thought less about that game the more time has gone on. And it's just, the more I think about it, it's such a crushing disappointment to me that could have been like this amazing visual novel trilogy And Virtue's Last Rewards remains my favorite visual novel, but Danganronpa, they nailed the ending here. I think this game trilogy is pretty excellent. They definitely wrapped things up in a very satisfying, crazy, insane way. And yeah, this game took me 40 hours to clear. This game is honestly probably too long. I think one of the major complaints I do have with this game, and I feel like this didn't really happen a whole lot in the other Danganronpa games. It's the pacing. This game drags. It really does at a lot of points, especially in the mid game, like around the third and fourth cases. It really drags at points, and the pacing is pretty off, and it can be quite boring at times. And the ending, as much as I love the ending, it's very long. It seems like it goes on forever, and the game just hammers its themes on you like constantly. Like it's just like hammering you over the head with its themes like endlessly, and it can get a little obnoxious, and it can get a little tiring. And that's a problem I think the series has had generally. The one of the major themes with these games is hope versus despair, and man, they really go crazy with it in this game, especially towards the end. And yeah, I won't lie, it can be a little overbearing, but I guess we should actually probably start with this game, talk about this game with the story. I mean, that's why you're going to be playing Danganronpa, the story, and yeah, the story is really compelling in this game. It's got the same setup as the previous games, where you basically find yourself trapped in this school, Hope's Peak Academy, and basically you're these 16 students, and each of them have what's called like an ultimate talent. So one character might be like the ultimate pianist rather. One character might be like the ultimate cook or whatever. And eventually they find themselves in this killing game, with the leader being Monokuma, this like bear, like almost like kind of like an animatronic robotic bear. And he's very threatening, and he's one of the best characters in the entire series, like a really endearing character that's really funny, but at the same time extremely threatening. And he's just an awesome character. He makes a return in this game as well. But basically, this killing game, the whole idea behind it is that if you commit a murder, if one of these students commits a murder, and basically they end up having like this class trial, and if they figure out who the murderer is, they kind of move on to the next round, as it were, and the murderer gets executed. But if the students all vote incorrectly, they all get murdered, and the person that murdered someone ends up escaping from the school. So that's kind of the general setup. So the game structure, it's got kind of like this interesting structure, and this is just going to be basically for people like that haven't played a Danganronpa game, to kind of give you an idea of how the game plays and how the structure is. You have the first-person sequences like you're seeing here, where you're kind of exploring the school and talking to the characters. A big component of the game is the free time, where you'll have free time to spend with other characters, and you kind of build your relationships. So it's kind of got that kind of aspect to the game, which I've always kind of liked in them. But the main part of the game are the class trials that you'll get to, where basically you'll kind of have like these truth bullets, where you're basically using them to kind of like cut through people's contradictions and lies, and you're kind of like arguing with your classmates. So you might each of your truth bullets will you'll kind of gather throughout the investigation sequences, where once a murder is committed, you'll kind of do an investigation, and you'll gather evidence and things like that. And they're all kind of in these truth bullets. And I've explained this in my other reviews, and it sounds like one of those crazy things. It sounds so unwieldy. It sounds like one of those things that's like not fun at all, and it sounds just really confusing. But when you actually play the game, it starts to make sense. Once you kind of get a feel for the trials, it will eventually make sense. But you've got like a reticle on the screen during like these debate sequences, and people are like shouting all these lines of dialogue. And as an example, say one of your truth bullets is like, I don't know, I can't really remember at the moment, but you might have a truth bullet that basically contradicts what someone says. And they'll say it in yellow text. And then basically blue text means it'll be in a statement that you might agree with, whereas yellow text is going to be a statement where you disagree. So you kind of use your various truth bullets to shoot the text. You're actually using the reticle to shoot the text with your truth bullet. And then basically you'll argue that they're wrong with the evidence that's in that truth bullet you have equipped. I know, it sounds crazy. It's really hard to explain in a review, but the tutorial in this game is actually pretty well done, and you'll understand it quick enough. Obviously, there's more to the game than these debate sequences. There's a lot of different mini-games that you'll find throughout the game. A lot of them are actually new for Danganronpa V3. For the most part, they're okay. Hangman's Gambit is a minigame that's been in the series since the beginning, and I liked it in the first game. In the second game, they called it the improved Hangman's Gambit, and man, it was the opposite of improved. It was fucking terrible. It's still the worst minigame that's ever been in the series, but it does make a return in this one. It's nowhere near as bad. But for instance, like, I'll kind of explain it a bit to give you an idea of how like the mini games work within these class trials. So basically, you have to figure out a keyword related to the case or the investigation in the class trial, and you'll have all these letters roaming around the screen, and they're all hidden, so you don't want to know what the letters are. But if you press the X button, you'll flash up a small part of the screen. And every 10 seconds or so, the whole screen will light up. So you can kind of see where all the letters are and what they are, and you kind of have to figure out the keyword related to a certain question. So yeah, so that's like one of the mini games. For instance, there's one called Psyche Taxi, where you have to answer questions, and you're driving a vehicle and you're running into letters to kind of spell out a question, and then you have to run over pedestrians with different answers to kind of answer the questions. So yeah, there's all these mini games like that. They're all extremely strange, and yeah, it all sounds absolutely bonkers, explaining it. But when you play the game, it kind of makes sense. The taxi mini game is probably the worst in the game. I think it just draws things out way too much. It's one of the things that contributes to the game is pretty sluggish pacing at times, because a lot of the times you'll already know the answers to these questions, and you're basically going through this 10-minute mini game for information that you already know. But anyways, these class trials kind of play out like Phoenix Wright trials a little bit. If you play the Phoenix Wright games, you'll kind of know what to expect, but the part of the fun is just all the crazy twists and mysteries that happen throughout these trials, and the ebb and flow of these trials. It's pretty crazy. You might be thinking a certain murder is going to go one way, or this is how this person was murdered, and then you'll get to the trial, and by the end you're just completely flabbergasted at what's happened. And I honestly, it's so rare that I fully predict how a murder trial is going to go. These games are always excellent at that, and just the way they build is just fascinating. So the game is kind of set up through chapters, and the Chapter 5 trial in particular, I think is outstanding. It's probably the best one in the entire series. It's really fascinating. But this game wouldn't work nearly as well if the characters weren't so intriguing. Because again, the Danganronpa games play with stereotypes and cliches. Like I said before, these characters all have their certain traits, right? The ultimate pianist, and things like that. And the game plays with those tropes. And it plays with those stereotypes in some really amazing ways that I really wouldn't want to spoil. But it's just, the characters are just absolutely terrific. I love spending all the free time with these characters and getting to know them. A lot of their interactions, the interactions between characters are phenomenal, especially within these class trials. A lot of these characters end up being some of my favorites in the series. Kaito is a really outstanding character. one of my favorite characters is a character that you just love to hate. Her name is Mew, and she's the ultimate inventor character, and she's basically this extremely foul-mouthed character, and every line of dialogue she has is just this ridiculously over-the-top, vulgar dialogue. And it's just absolutely insane, some of the stuff she says, and her interactions with Koichi, who's another one of my favorite characters. It's just, oh my god, man, it made me laugh so much. Just the interactions that those two characters had with each other. So yeah, it's the game wouldn't work nearly as well if the characters weren't so memorable and intriguing. And just like with previous Danganronpa games, the characters are excellent here. Probably my favorite cast of characters in the entire series, to be honest. But other things with the game, you can collect presents that you can kind of give to characters to kind of build up your relationships more. There's a casino you'll find, so there's some mini games that you'll play there. But most of the game is wandering the school, talking to characters, and then going through the class trials. It is definitely a very much a story-driven game. A lot of dialogue. If you're the kind of person that loves games for gameplay and you just don't, story is very low on the totem pole for you, it might not be your thing. But this is one of those games that I think, the Danganronpa series, a lot of people are going to look at it and it's just going to seem so over the top and Japanese and weird that I think a lot of people are just going to immediately dismiss it. And that's one of the unfortunate things, I think, because honestly, I'm the type of person that should hate something like this, but it's incredibly compelling. It's so unique. There's nothing quite like this series out there, and I really think more people should give this series a shot. I think you'll be very surprised by what you find here. Definitely give that first game a shot, because like I said before, I don't know if I would immediately jump into this one, but in terms of comparisons between the previous two games, it's very similar. There's not a whole lot different here. Again, like I was saying, the mini games are different, but I mean the structure of the game is the same. The trials generally play out fairly similarly. The one new thing, I guess, is that the fact that you can actually lie in this game. One of the big themes of this game compared to the other two games is truth versus lie, truth versus lies, and you can actually lie in this game to kind of change how the case is, or not the case, how the class trial kind of flows. And so that you have to hold triangle with your truth bullet and then shoot a contradiction. And how that plays into the story and the class trials is, I think, pretty fascinating. That's one of the big changes with this game compared to previous games. But generally, though, it's kind of more of the same. Just a lot longer. The first two Danganronpa games took me 25 hours, where this is 40 hours. So yeah, the pacing, I think, is definitely more sluggish compared to the previous games, which is a bit of a shame. There is substantial post-game content in V3. Once you actually finish the game, there's this weird board game mini game. There's a dungeon crawler mini game where you're kind of building up social links, I guess, with the characters and getting to know them a little better. It's cool. I'm glad that it exists. It's totally optional. I tried it for a little bit. It just seemed like a waste of time, and 40 hours was enough for me. There's so many games coming out this year that I still need to get to that I don't want to really spend my time doing all this optional post-game stuff. But it's there for people that really want to hang out with these characters more. Especially if one of your favorite characters died early on. That's always a bummer with these games. And I'll admit, some of my favorite characters early on bit the dust, and I was like, oh man, that sucks. This game, it's very humorous at times, but it's also very dark and emotional at times as well, especially towards the end. But one of the best things about this game is definitely the plot twists. Just so many crazy plot twists in these games. Now, before I move on to the visuals and audio, and then wrapping up the review, because I've already pretty much talked about the gameplay. There's really not much in the way of gameplay other than these mini games that, I'll be honest, don't play extremely well. The driving mini game, for instance, I mean, it doesn't control particularly well. So yeah, the mini games aren't the best, but. Anyways, the one thing I want to talk about is the ending to this game. And don't worry, again, I'm not going to spoil anything here, but the ending has been talked about quite a bit. It seems to be a divisive ending, I guess. Some people really hate it and the implications it has for the series. And without spoiling anything, all I'll say is I loved it. I fucking loved the ending to this game. I think it might be one of my favorite endings to a video game. It's insane. It's absolutely crazy, and the messages and themes that this ending brings up, I think, are very interesting and relatable for me, especially. So yeah, that's all I'll say. Is that I loved the ending. I think it's absolutely amazing. And it's one of the highlights of the game. I was kind of feeling a little bored with it at certain points due to that the pacing, but the ending just completely, man, it really ended on such a strong note for me that this does end up being one of my favorite games of the year. And it's probably my favorite game in the Danganronpa series. I think I prefer it over the first two games on the Vita. Well, actually, they're on PS4 as well now, but anyways, moving on. The visuals. I love the look of these games. I love the. I mean, the game obviously has a very anime like art style to it, especially with like the character designs. But the game's use of color and the way it's presented with like these comic book, it's got like a comic strip style where these environments are 3D, but the characters and a lot of assets are 2D. So it's got like this pop-up book looking effect when you go through the environments, and when you go to a new area, it kind of like the background kind of appears first, and then all like the foreground elements will start popping in one by one, and all the foreground elements are 2D, like the characters you're seeing here on the screen here. It's this really cool effect. It's the same effect they've used for the previous games, and it works incredibly well. And just the game's use of color is just very vibrant. The game is it's stylish. It's a very stylish game. Sure, on a technical level, it might not look amazing. You can still tell that this game, even though it's on PS4, it's still a Vita game at its core. But I don't know. I really love like the art style that they use in the Danganronpa games. Just really great. Especially, I know I keep bringing this up, but Zero Time Dilemma, like, I mean, that game looked so terrible. The presentation was so low budget. And I don't know. This game, they went for this 2D look that obviously wasn't very expensive. They didn't spend a lot on the game's visual budget, but because of the art style that they went with, it still looks great. Despite not being technically impressive or anything like that. Audio, voice acting is uniformly excellent. I've often said that English dubs for Japanese games, I really don't think they're near as bad as a lot of people think they are. And Danganronpa, the series in general, has always had outstanding English voice acting. And it's the same case here. I will say I do wish there was more of it. Like with the previous games, most of the voice acting is in the class trials themselves. When you're actually exploring the school and talking to characters, it's actually not voiced like whatsoever. You'll just have like little voice clips here and there, which is a bit of a bummer because I do think the voice acting is just really good across the board. Music, there's not a whole lot of songs in this game, but the songs that are here are really good. There's obviously some repeat songs from Danganronpa 1 and 2, but the music's a little tough to describe. It's very different. It's very like atmospheric. Some of it is like really goofy sounding, but a lot of it's like very atmospheric and like I don't know. It's really hard to describe the music in these games, but it fits the style of the game so well. And there's a lot of really catchy songs in here. Actually, my favorite song is the one that plays during the closing argument sections of the trials, where you're kind of going through comic panels and kind of putting together the sequence of events for the murder. The song that plays during those segments is really awesome. I wish it played somewhere else during the game because I really liked it quite a bit. But I wish I could talk about the music more. It's just really hard to describe. You really have to hear it for yourself. I don't know. I think Danganronpa 2 probably still has my favorite soundtrack of the series. There were a lot of songs in that game that I absolutely loved. The soundtrack in this might be the weakest of the three, but it's still really good. It is a bit of a shame, though, that it's so limited. I felt like I was kind of hearing the same songs over and over again, but still quite good. But anyways, I'm going to wrap things up now. I wish I could talk more about the story and a lot about the crazy twists. I might do a spoiler review, or I might do like maybe try doing a podcast with someone else that's finished the game, because I think there's a lot to discuss with the game's ending, the game's themes, and how it wraps up Danganronpa as a whole. But yeah, this is a must-play, especially if you played the first two games. I think for the most part you'll enjoy it. The ending, I don't know, I guess it's divisive, so maybe some people might end up disliking the game because of that. I guess we'll see. And I definitely am very curious to see the impact of this game on the series. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds for Danganronpa as a series. But yeah, if you haven't played the Danganronpa series, I definitely implore you to play the first game. That game's a wonderful, like, just crazy, unique game, and give it a chance. This game might seem off-putting at first glance, but give it a chance. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, and yeah, V3 had a great time with it. Definitely, I had my complaints here and there. I think the big one's the pacing, and just, the game being way too long and a little dull at certain points, but boy, does it end strong. But anyways, that's it, guys. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.